I'm very happy to introduce the last two speakers, whose work is situated at the crossroads of architecture and film, and has actually brought those two disciplines closer than ever before. Penelope Charalabidou is a senior lecturer at the Bartlett School of Architecture, UCL. She is acting director of the MPhil and PhD Architectural Design program there, and the MArch Unit 24 coordinator. She has published a wonderful monograph entitled Marcel Duchamp and the Architecture of Desire, and has contributed writing on themes such as allegory, figural theory, stereoscopy, and film in architecture. She has organized two symposia on architecture and filmmaking at UCL and at the Royal Academy. Her project at Tomorrow's, which is a presentation of student work at the Bartlett School of Architecture, is about the future of architectural form and the city, and is a very good example of what Penelope has defined as architectural essay films. And this is actually what she's going to talk to us about tonight, architectural essay films. Liam Young, on the other hand, is an architect who has provocatively said that he doesn't believe in architects. He operates in the spaces between design, fiction, and futures. He's the founder of a think tank called Tomorrow's Thoughts Today, which is a group whose work explores the possibilities of fantastic, speculative, and imaginary urbanisms. He also runs the Unknown Field Division, a nomadic research studio which travels all around the world to document emerging trends and uncover the possible futures. Liam is also a producer of a BAFTA-nominated short film, and his work has been collected by very well-established institutions, such as the Victoria and Albert Museum. Liam's project at Tomorrow's was a production commissioned by the Onassis Cultural Center, and it was based on a series of short stories and scripts that were written by invited writers such as Bruce Sterling, James Bridle, Ioanna Bourazopoulou, and Lee Alexander, in an event that took place a few weeks ago at this same building that we're here. So, Penelope?
So, hello everyone. No one can properly see me, but I asked specifically for the lights to be down because we were looking at films. But it's a really great pleasure to be here, and I wanted to thank Panos and Daphne for inviting me, and it's also great to see so many familiar faces that I haven't seen for perhaps 20 years. As Panos said, my name is Penelope Charalabidou, and I'm a senior lecturer at the Bartlett School of Architecture in London. I just wanted to give a really brief introduction of what I do. Panos also talked about it, and throughout my personal work and teaching, I have been interested in drawing and its potential as a research methodology, not only in architecture, but also other disciplines. And this is something that I have employed in my monograph, Marcel Duchamp and the Architecture of Desire, which uses architectural drawing, modeling, and film to perform an art historical analysis of Duchamp's work. I'm currently the acting director of our PhD Architectural Design program at the Bartlett, where students explore research by design, and I organize the yearly PhD Research Projects Conference and Exhibition. I also coordinate the Masters Unit 24, which focuses on the relationship between film and architecture, and which I'm very pleased that is part of the Tomorrow's exhibition currently showing in room 18. Today I wanted to give a short introduction to a recent research interest that looks at what I have called the architectural essay film, before discussing the architectural films produced in Unit 24. And you may ask, what is an essay film? And essay film is an elusive genre at the margins between fiction and documentary that, although appears early on in the history of cinema, it has only recently started to attract attention. The term essay film was coined by the German artist and filmmaker Hans Richter in the 1940s. We're going back in history now. We've been looking at a lot of ideas about the future, but I will go back in history for a bit. Richter suggests that an essay film makes the invisible world of thoughts and ideas visible on the screen. These thoughts and reflections can be a reading of reality, but can also be contradictory, irrational, and fantastical. And perhaps the typical essayist director is Chris Marker, and especially his film Sans Soleil, which is a contemplation on the role of memory and the human condition. Here we see the last scenes of the film, where Marker experimented, perhaps for the first time, with digitizing video. You can also see the transcription of the accompanying pondering voiceover, referring to letters by a fictitious film director. Film studies theorist Timothy Corrigan suggests that the essay film should not be seen as a new genre, but a continuation of the tradition of the literary essay, starting with Montaigne. As such, one of the main characteristics of the essay film is subjectivity, but also heresy and openness. I'm very fond of Jean-Luc Godard's description of the essay film as a form that thinks and thought that forms. So how do I define the architectural essay film? Well, quite simply, architectural essay films are essay films that take as the subject matter architecture of the city. I see the architectural essay film as a hybrid practice at the boundaries between filmmaking, architectural design, art practice, but also history and theory, that provides an essay's reflection and critique of the built environment as a side of socio-political structures, ideologies, and identity. Architectural essay films do not only just portray architecture, but use architecture as their structure. And I want to give some historical examples, starting with Dziga Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera from 1929. Vertov believed that the camera, what he called the kino eye, was able to capture fragments of reality, which, when organized together through montage, showed a deeper truth that was invisible to the naked eye. So I'm interested here in how the camera, as a design tool, is used to build a new ideology. Alain René's Toute la mémoire du monde from 1957 is an essay film on the human need to preserve memory and knowledge, and is grafted on the skin of the old National Library in Paris that the camera caresses following the arrival of a new book. Here, I'm interested in how a spatial idea can be mapped on the structure of a building. Of course, London from 1994 by Patrick Hiller, who is a quintessential architectural essayist director, who was a UCL-trained architect turned then film director. And more recent examples include Wim Wenders' Cathedrals of Culture from 2014, which is 4 short films by different directors, and where buildings such as Hans Scharoun's Berliner Philharmonic and Louis Kahn's Salk Institute acquire the status of a character that speaks directly to the viewer. I'm very interested in the work of Villa Becker and Louise Lemoine, who, for instance, Barbicania for 2014, where through intimate observation and interaction with the inhabitants of the Barbican estate, the film aims to penetrate through the image of the architecture and to let architecture talk to us from an inner point of view, both personal and subjective. As a bridge to the next part of my talk, I wanted to mention the work of another celebrated essayist director, Harun Farocki. Farocki's work explores how image-making technology can be used to shape public perception, and his films often tackle politically charged topics, from the use of napalm by the US in the Vietnam War to video games and conflict simulation. Just before his death in 2014, he developed a series of films studying the digital architecture of video games entitled Parallel 1 to 4. Describing the films in an interview, he says, "I'm just researching these strange new images, which are somehow on the verge of competing with and defeating, finally, the cinematographic, photographic image. So the era of reproduction seems to be over, more or less, and the era of construction of a new world seems to somehow on the horizon." And he quickly corrects himself and says, or not on the horizon, it's already here. This potential offered by the digital turn of the architectural essay film is something we have explored in the Masters Unit 24, which I coordinate with Michael Tite, and until 2016 with Simon Kennedy. Since 2013, we have been exploring the new possibilities offered by digital techniques in film and architecture drawing, and inspired by historical and contemporary architectural essay films. The work combines techniques and tropes from film and architecture as a propositional technique in architectural design, but also as a means for reflection and commentary. The digital has allowed groundbreaking, if not hasty, changes in the way that architecture is conceived, designed, and constructed. In contrast, however, to the extensive use of computational design to interrogate the formal, material, and structural possibilities of built architecture, in Unit 24 we're interested in how new time-based media unlock the storytelling and affective, but also political and philosophical potential of architectural thinking. In traditional architectural essay films, the filmmaker uses an existing city or a building to construct a spatial reflection through the camera. Designers today, though, are able to tap into another digital, that of the computer-generated imagery also found in cinema and video games industries, for creating immersive environments. In this other digital, drawn architectural form, the domain of the architect, and the camera, together with lighting, scripting, and editing, the domain of the film director, lose their tangible materiality and become part of a unified virtual system. For the Tomorrow's exhibition, I have grouped the Unit 24 architectural essay films in 3 categories: tomorrow's buildings, tomorrow's landscapes, and tomorrow's cities. And I will now talk about one film from each category, giving some background on what guides the work, before playing the 3 short films one after the other. So through drawing with film, some students choose to create philosophical or political architectural allegories that take the form of a building. Located within the industrial hinterlands of the city of Leicester, Angeliki imagines a library embedded within the mysterious and bleak microcosmos of Soar Island. This shifting, labyrinthine terrain is loosely traced out across the island, guided by the writings of Borges, Eco, and Deleuze. Complex interconnecting networks of rooms lure the visitor to endlessly explore the depths of the apparently boundaryless interior. Weaving the ineffable seeks to construct an architecture inspired by philosophy and literature, where non-linear structures of space can echo the uncanny structures of the mind. Angeliki studied Renessi's essay film about a library and constructed her own as an essay on the role of architecture as a representation of different types of paths to knowledge. The project never had an orthographic plan. Instead, the idea was that it might multiply and grow as you move around it. Disconnected from brick and mortar, but providing an immersive experience, Angeliki explores the potential for architecture to convey theory. New immersive technologies such as Oculus, Vive, and 3D scanning not only push the boundaries of what film is, but propose new digital landscapes. Established between London, Athens, and Lesbos Island in December 2015, the Embassy for the Displaced is a design-based collective that operates both in the field and remotely, providing spontaneous responses to those embroiled in the refugee crisis. Stephanos' questioning of the new image-making technologies and the way they can be used to shape public perception perhaps is closer to Farokhi's work. A no-borders backpack made from discarded boats and life jackets was assembled to alleviate the immediate needs of those arriving on the island. Following this, a series of carefully curated 3D scans formed the basis of an immersive film conveying the real-time plight of desperation to the wider world. In Stephanos' case, the architectural essay film becomes a vehicle for politically engaged action in Hannah Arendt's definition of the term. The Embassy for the Displaced serves as a Designs for Survival laboratory, a visual archive of the refugee journey, and an institution on the side of the displaced. Stephanos creates a new type of digital landscape, an archipelago of testimony, and an embodied archive of not only a site, but an event that links the personal histories of the displaced, a land for the landless. Finally, fiction and storytelling becomes a potent tool to imagine the future of the city. Subterranean Singapore 2065 is a speculative underground master plan for the city-state of Singapore. The filmic project proposes a cavernous subterranean architecture comprising modular superframe structures and monumental inflatables sustaining artificial weather, which enable dueling on a national scale. In the film, Finn counteracts this brave new world vision with another viewpoint, that of an insurgent climbing down to the cavernous space with the aim to disrupt it. Like Vertov, Finn attempts to construct an image of the future city. However, his kino eye does not only record and recompose the reality of the contemporary city, but digitally superimposes an alternative, constructed reality as a means of provocation. In contrast to Vertov's praise of the machine, the film takes the form of a cautionary tale. And I will now show the films one after the other.
Perhaps I exaggerated. I can no longer validate my words. Memories will inquire as time validated.
My world seemed infinite, yet I always felt something was trapping me. I never found any dead ends, but I kept finding myself where I started. I could catch glimpses of detours. I could hear the running water, yet I never diverged.
Sometimes I would spend hours assembling fragments of memories. Some I would piece together, and some would be lost in their silent universe. I would connect threads, trying to exhaust all combinations. Sometimes I would get back to where I started, and some others, an unexpected discovery would occur. I felt reassured by the warmth of the sun. It compelled me to endlessly navigate.
It is not like I was always on good terms with this place. I often enjoy returning to its safety, remembering my place. My thought is not a straight path anymore. Every route can be unique. I can be alone. Or surrounded by others, forming a system that exhausts all possibilities. Universal knowledge lies on all individual reflections. In an inherent curiosity, in an assembled sun. Perhaps I exaggerated.
وصلنا باردين بس بأمان. محظوظين، في كتير ضاعوا بالميات. ليسبوس، أوروبا، بيقولوا إنه كل شخطورة هون كل سترة وقاية قصة نجاة. هيدي الشواطئ هيدي الصخور بتعرف إني غلطانين. صار حرب، الهجرة من أرض هيدا هو شو. هلش خطير اللي عم بتموت. ذكرى إنه نحن أكثر من طلب لجوء، من سطح حقولها من ضحية نحن أخي بلد
The Subterranean Development Institute, established in 2020, was in response to the constant land crisis faced by Singapore, and it has been running for the past 45 years. As a tiny island nation, we have always been forced to overcome our geographical limitations through artificial means, and the Institute aims to complement lateral land reclamation into the sea with vertical underground land reclamation beneath populous areas. The main appeal of the underground is the use of an environmental shelter. It has become increasingly desirable in light of growing air pollution. As a nation, we have always organized space so that people never have to go outside. As such, many consider Singapore an aircon nation, and therefore the interior of the underground would be embraced culturally. And over the past few decades, we have been quarrying and constructing a mixed-use master plan within the Bukit Timah granite, deep beneath the central region. Governed by the unique zoning laws in Singapore, the master plan structure operates within state-owned land, between 30 and 200 meters below the surface. The massing of the structure is governed by a single master section. It will be arranged and underpinned by a subterranean promenade streetscape and tiered mixed-use facades. Steel superframe allows the master plan to be completely flexible, where individual building elements can be inserted and hung from the vertical facades. Individual units are optimized for subterranean livability, incorporating inflatable technologies as well as light wells and void spaces. Air from deeper underground reservoirs will be pumped in, naturally cooling the interior, therefore utilizing minimal energy. We have spent many years refining the design of the single-skinned inflatable structure, and naturally, we encountered many setbacks during the early stages. Eventually, we developed an optimized breathing system which allows for much larger structures to be erected. Considering how Singapore used to import almost half of its water supply from Malaysia, an added benefit of the master plan is that it increases the capacity to collect and filter rainwater. Reservoir rifts are home to a free port, and at the same time we have developed high-end residential properties for wealthy individuals in this area. This has led to over 900 billion in foreign and domestic investment in the past 45 years and has since been the key driver of economic growth. But more importantly, it has reinforced Singapore's status as the global center for wealth creation and protection. The 2065 vision heralds a new age of underground inhabitation. It has been widely celebrated by the public as a key frontier of technological innovation.
Hi. Right. So it's fantastic to be back in Athens. We had a great weekend a month or so ago, as Panos was describing, developing the frameworks and the scripts for the project that you'll see upstairs. And it's great to be amongst fellow travelers as well, and a part of the fantastic exhibition that Daphne and Panos put together. So really what my role is within the exhibition is to play the part of the speculative architect, and as Panos suggested I have a rather questionable relationship with traditional forms of architectural practice and what we might think of as the traditional role of the architect. And instead, what we do, rather than making and shaping physical buildings, is that we explore the global urban and architectural implications of some of the technologies that people like Adam and others have been talking about. And like Penelope, we borrow from the techniques of fiction, film, and performance to visualize stories of these cities, both real and also imagined, in order to engage audiences with the extraordinary ways that technology is changing our world. And we hope in turn that by understanding these technologies and their consequences, we may all in some way become a little bit more critical consumers rather than just standing in line waiting for the next iPhone to be released. And it's really what we do to kind of get there is an architectural process of what we might think of as world building. And what we've tried to do with the project Upstairs is exactly that, using fiction as a space in which to prototype the lives of a future Athens apartment block, not as a form of prediction, but rather as a mechanism through which to reframe some of the issues of the present, or perhaps to make visible some of the tensions that simmer below the surface. And what I want to do for the next 20 minutes in that sense is narrate for you a series of stories that form a portrait of another future fictional city. It'll be a kind of city symphony through a place that we call City Everywhere. That'll be stitched together from documentary footage of real sites that we've visited with the nomadic research studio that I run with Kate Davies from London called Unknown Fields, found footage scavenged from the web, some notable reference projects from fellow travelers, and short fragments of speculative film projects that we've developed out of these conditions with my own practice. And throughout the City Symphony, there'll be little credits that pop up in the corner of some of the slides that can start to reference you back to larger projects. Let's get going. So tonight, as I said, I'm not going to go through the work upstairs, but instead definitely wanted to do one of my other stories. So we're going to explore this city everywhere, a city of the post-Anthropocene, and we're all going to take a seat in a driverless taxi and go on a tour through this place. Because a lot of our work is interested in this idea that driverless cars, smartphones, augmented reality goggles, Pokemon Go, Wi-Fi hotspots, Amazon delivery drones, internet-connected fridges, and so on, are all technologies that are fundamentally changing what cities are and how we interact with the spaces around us. So tonight we're going to explore this city through the eyes of these machines. So let's tap our destination onto our smartphones and buckle up as we're going to travel from the center of this city to the landscapes scattered across the edges of the earth that this city produces. So here we are in our driverless taxi, and the smart city, the city that manages this place, is sitting beside us. And it smells of hard drives and fiber optics and Red Bull soda. And the city has invited us on a road trip across its digital skin, and it's looking forward to showing us around to visit the sites and structures made for and by its machines, sites in which we no longer belong. And as we keep on traveling, we look out the window, and in the distance we see the tracery of markings scored across the city's surface. It's the first site that it's taking us to visit, and it's not evidence of some ancient tribal culture or a forgotten relic of the Nazca lines, but these are the traces of the new tribes of the digital, the animal tracks of orbiting machines above. So this is a satellite calibration target, a machine vision graphic etched into the ground of the city that supports the whole precision that the system relies on. And these patterns are created to give satellite-mounted cameras something in which to calibrate their lenses.
Sandy Island mystery that was in the Sydney Morning.
And our next stop is
Sandy
here.
Island was actually found on Google Earth.
So as we travel across this pixel sea, we're explorers in this strange land, and just off the coast of the city is a place called Sandy Island. And it's a collection of dark pixels, GPS coordinates, hyperlinks, and stories. and it was originally chartered by the whaling ship Velocity in 1876, and the island has long been what's called an evidence-doubtful landmass, a place perhaps originally recorded as a mislabeled pile of volcanically ejected pumice seen drifting on the horizon. And this cartographic apparition remained visible in the Google Earth model of City Everywhere until an Australian research vessel confirmed its non-existence during a 2012 expedition to survey the ocean floor. But up until that point, to a world of Google explorers and hyperlink adventurers, this island was just as real as any other place that they visited online. It begs the question that if the places and spaces exist solely in the mediums through which we experience them, then perhaps they become just as real as any other place that exists in what we might describe as the real or the physical. Can we turn the sound up a bit? And this, in many ways, is this new city, this post-Anthropocene city, and it operates on this Borgesian one-to-one digital model of the world. And the pixel is the territory, and the driverless car is our vessel. And the city turns to us and smiles with a grin of server racks and silica. And our car is now scanning the landscape. It's shooting out a laser at 1,000,000 times a second, reflecting off the world and rendering it as this point cloud. And this post-Anthropocene is made for this way of seeing. This is the new nature that we're all designing for, no longer based on our own patterns of vision or occupation anymore, but instead we've been displaced from the center of this city. And the first characters we meet in this City Everywhere are the hipsters of the post-Anthropocene. These are the young ravers of the city who reimagine their fashion cycles to follow the rate of Moore's Law, the latest phone model or software update, rather than a change in natural season. And they adorn themselves in new camouflage textiles, a new hoodie that's designed to be invisible to the LiDAR scanning technologies of City Everywhere. Because camouflage has always reflected our relationship to nature, and now this is the landscape that we're responding to. And their iridescent textiles reflect the light of CCTV laser scanners, creating exuberant glitches and distortions and disturbances in the dataset. And as we leave the hipsters of City Everywhere behind us, we're taken to the residential districts to visit the Samsung Towers. And the city has taken us in, and we put our ears to the cool beveled aluminium door of one of the apartments inside and listen. And inside we hear Duri drop her Samsung Galaxy SX phone onto the kitchen table, and we hear it chime softly with the Samsung Qi Smart Power charging mat. And we hear her scream down the hallway at her husband, raising her voice over the Samsung air conditioner. "Why does the new TV say LG on it?" she says. "What do you mean? Because it's made by LG," he replies. "Are you trying to get us thrown out? Our lease is up for review in 3 months, and you bought an LG TV into a Samsung housing block. What the hell will the neighbors say?" she says. And the city just shrugs. It uses Apple, and it doesn't care for the tribulations of the Samsungese. And as we keep driving, we see the city's drones drifting above us. And they're the new inhabitants of the city of technology. And we see the city through their eyes. So in machine vision systems, a fiducial is a recognizable marker that's placed in the environment which is used for calibration and navigation. And now, as the pixel is reshaping our cities, we're seeing the emergence of a new genre of architecture in the city, a kind of fiducial architecture that's designed to be read by the eyes of machines rather than our own vision and patterns of occupation. And these technologies now define our designs and experience of this new city. And the architectures of City Everywhere become like green screen studios or blank geometries with calibration marker ornamentation. And the world becomes a screen lying in wait for the premiere of 1 million animated movies seen through the lens of Google Glass or Oculus Rift. And a YouTube cat video viral bursts from the screen, and in the eyes of Google Glass holes it skates across the floor, and the digital ephemera of the internet fills our physical spaces. No matter how many times the city and I watch it, the cat's still just as cute. And an empty room fills with the flood of a newscast, broadcasting the latest tsunami from across the ocean. And what was once trapped on our screens now fills the world, and we inhabit our own pixel dreams. And spaces are tattooed with the tracking markers required to locate all of our projected deepest fantasies. And these new systems of seeing in City Everywhere have also, these new machine vision creatures have now also become as ubiquitous as pigeons. All the drones in the city are walked by, all the dogs in the city, are walked by drones now, the city says. Think of the time saving. And a network of drones now monitor the wayward youth of a London council estate. And we watch as a young girl has hacked and decorated her own drone, and she uses it to pass notes to her boyfriend trapped in the tower opposite. And like kids in an old-fashioned classroom, they scribble messages on their drones and they send them back and forth between the towers. And in this near-future city, drones form both agents of state surveillance, but also become co-opted as the aerial vehicles through which two teens might fall in love. And another drone, armed with a dildo, disrupts the Russian parliamentary session. And another zips overhead, en route to attack a village in a country half a world away. We should follow the Amazon Prime drone that's zipping about above us, the city says. We can follow it back to the Amazon warehouse. That's where we keep, well, everything, says the city. And now on our tour through the city, stretching out before us is the endless shelves and storage bins of the Amazon Fulfillment Center. And the bookshelves here are stacked based on a complex sorting algorithm that's engineered around sales frequencies and buying patterns. And from the window of our taxi, we watch as Amazon robots rush through the stacks, navigating from book to book, filling orders by following their most efficient route generated for them by their navigational programming. And this is the library of City Everywhere. It's not organized around the Dewey Decimal System, but by buying habits and aggregated data sets. It's a library that's not organized for us, but it's a space organized by digital logics and inhabited by the bodies repurposed as machines. And we drive deeper into the city. And we see that these are the human machines of the production line. This is who many of us have all become in this Anthropocenic city. just passengers in a planetary-scaled robot. And in a way, we're the new robots of this new city everywhere, where the body is matched in speed to the conveyor belt that turns in front of it. Parts per minute are counted, defects are identified, and this is us in city everywhere, where any meaningful moment can somehow be counted and measured and tracked. And technology is handcrafted by a million figures scattered around the world. And on the conveyor belt, we're doing to biology what we once did to the production of technology. In the city, we make all our own fish now, matched to the color of our eyes and to our shoes.
My mother used to tell me that I had the most beautiful eyes. I liked hearing that. I like it when people look into my eyes, when they stare at them. Royal blue with an amber halo.
From our tour through the city, we can see that the infrastructures of the digital world have extraordinary implications on material experience. These are the architectures behind the screen and beyond the fog of the cloud. These are the physical outputs of our digital engagement with the world. So what if we were designed within these systems to make design decisions not based on how a device might slide into our pockets or make a seamless aluminium edge, but on the events they set in motion across the other side of the world? What would a new aesthetic for the Anthropocene be? In search of that question, we leave the light to the city behind, and we drive on through the dust and we see the rhythms of the human conveyor belt in Madagascar, where 70% of our precious gemstones come from. And here it's cheaper to pay 20 men in rice than it is to maintain and fuel a mechanical conveyor belt. So a hidden black market supply chain connects this site to the jewelry stores, hip-hop music videos, and celebrity red carpets across the ocean. So for the jewelry and the aesthetics of City Everywhere, we've used the amount of rice of the human conveyor belt consuming in a day to manufacture a single synthetic gemstone. And the rice is subjected to intense heat and pressure in the lab to produce a diamond for a gold hip-hop tooth that embodies the systems through which these worlds are intimately and profoundly connected. And as we keep on driving, we pass through the city's energy pools. And these are only revealed when we see them from our drone drifting above through Chile and Bolivia. We now drive past the evaporation ponds of the world's largest lithium mines. And this is the landscape behind the scenes of all the batteries that power our city. And 70% of the world's lithium is here. So if the future is electric, if the future is Elon Musk and his Tesla-fueled dreams, then the future is buried here, beneath the salt flats of Bolivia. And as we drive on, we see from a clearing in the point cloud mist the cavernous landscapes of our ephemeral technologies. It is in these massive mining excavations scattered on the edge of the world that our new digital reality, our new smart city, our new city everywhere begins and ends its life. And we each have a bit of the gold or aluminium from these sites in the technologies in our pockets. It's charged and quietly vibrating. And the digital models of these landscapes are now linked live to the fluctuations of metal prices on the stock market. And as explosive diggers and drills have now replaced the slow erosion of rivers and earthquakes, we're scoring our economy into the archaeological record, a chronicle of the digital permutations that drive the modern world. And in the landscapes we see vehicles just like ours without drivers, but just systems. And mining trucks rumble up mountains and tractors carve soil along satellite trails generated by their orbiting bodies above. And our journey through the city is taking us across the planet, through landscapes at the scale of the pixel that are affecting landscapes at the scale of canyons and continents. And a city like this one can no longer be described as a single point on a map anymore, but our technologies cast shadows that stretch across the Earth. And we might pack up all the objects and materials that produced in these sites, and then we send them off on ships around the world. And now from our taxi we see the computer-controlled container fleet of the mega shipping industry that also navigate autonomously based on these satellites above. And the ship captain and the portside crane operators have also been made obsolete. And they're just passengers in the machine, their bodies repurposed as a component in the landscape-scaled robot that stacks the containers, ready for transport, bringing our goods all the way home. And finally, the city brings us to the shores of its radioactive lake. And this is some of the first footage of the toxic waste that sits beside the world's largest rare earth mineral refinery. And we take a selfie with our phones, and we see our reflection in the mirrored screen. And the material to polish its glass and run its software produces this very lake. And collapsed together in this single luminous surface, we see ourselves and this black earth. And from this sludge we've made a vase for the city to thank it for its tour. It's a set of vases made from the amount of waste generated in the production of 3 objects: an iPhone, a MacBook, and a Tesla electric battery. It's a new material aesthetic for the technologies born of the earth. It's a Ming vase for the city everywhere generation. And our last stop, as we've travelled on this journey across city everywhere, is out in the landscape. We finish here to meet the creatures that are left behind. We hear the bird song. It's a chorus for this new world, a chorus for city everywhere. And in this last project, I released 80 canaries into a sealed gallery space. And slowly I increased the levels of CO2 in the gallery in line with the predicted increases of the Anthropocene if our culture continues without change. It's an interior as a model of accelerated climate change. And I act as a kind of pollution DJ. And against the rise in CO2, I narrate the predicted developments of technology, the wonders of possible progress. And in city everywhere, the birds are no longer singing. If we listen, we're strolling towards a silent spring. And so as we finish our tour, we see that it's important to travel to play these places both in fiction in stories, and in reality. And we see that our technologies, our buildings, our spaces are formed from this planetary scaled machine and infrastructure so large that it's become invisible, a machine so often disguised, ignored, or forgotten behind the gloss of the screen, the seamless aluminium edge, or the glare of the pixel. And we must move beyond the dominant media narratives of technology, the rhetoric of the new, the easier, autonomous, the optimized, which are the rhetoric of things that are just going to make our lives better in all possible ways. And instead, through this kind of speculative and literal immersion in the complexity of these technologies, we can begin to imagine perhaps how, as designers, we can begin instigating new cultural relationships with the inevitable byproducts of industry and technology. Because it's from all these landscapes on the edge of the world that our new post-Anthropocene realities begin and end their lives. Thanks.
It has almost been 5 hours since the beginning of an event, but I think it's worth spending a few more minutes for a couple of questions. So, as a reaction to the city everywhere concept that Liam developed, I would like to raise the issue of locality. During the early stages of discussions with Daphne, we were very much influenced by a famous quotation by William Gibson, who says that the future is already here, however, it is not evenly distributed. And we discussed a lot about speculative visions of the 20th century, especially science fiction films, which usually take place in either in the famous metropolis or in generic cities, usually American cities. On the other hand, in this exhibition, we are very, very happy that we have some examples like Levidis' film that takes place in Lesbos, in a peripheral place at the borders of the Western world. And we are also very happy with the outcome of our collaboration with Liam for the production of his film about Athens. This film of the huge apartment block, like Polykatikia on steroids, that takes place 30, 40 years from now. So my question to both of you is about the importance of locality in your work and how you think that the issue of locality is important in establishing speculative visions for the future.
I can start. Yeah, I mean, I think really the question of site is perhaps a key question within all of our work, actually. I mean, I'm still trained as a traditional architect from a very traditional school in Australia, where the dominant narrative is one of genius loci, like what does place mean? What does it mean to put a building in place? And really what we're doing with our projects is kind of searching for a contemporary notion of place, trying to understand what that means, trying to think about this network condition as another kind of site, where as designers we can actually insert an object in this choreographed network of flows, and it may be some kind of relational object or choreographic object that actually creates influence other than itself, that resonates somewhere down the stream. And what we try and do with the film work is to try and map those complex network conditions, to try and understand them as a site and present them to audiences as such. And really, we use the tools of fiction and storytelling as an efficient medium to somehow visualize, dramatize, and cut through the complexity of this extraordinary, complex, intricate condition of contemporary site or location, and present it in ways that an audience can start to connect with, right? So that we can actually start to map it as a means to start to design within it and start to influence and shape it somehow. So the question of site is really key and fundamental, I think.
For us, the question of site is also really important, and projects only become really embedded in what they're looking at if they have a very good understanding of the site. For instance, Finn's project about Singapore, obviously he's British, but his girlfriend is from Singapore. He had spent quite a lot of time there, and he also, the year before he did, in the summer before he did the project, he actually was in the celebrations of the 2015, it was the centenary of the establishment of Singapore as a nation, or I might be wrong here, but he observed a celebration which was very similar to the one that he was describing in the film, and that was the very first idea.
Talk closer.
Oh, sorry.
That's the message I'm getting.
The very first idea that actually generated the project. At the same time, though, I wanted to just mention something that last year we had as a general conversation in the unit, because we were looking at this idea of the local and the global, and it was something that a lot of the projects, and Stefanos' project and Finn's project were from this year. And I think that there is an issue in regards to how we see the local and the global. And one could say that the problems that we see currently politically is with come as a reaction to globalization and looking at the global as a negative. But this local as well, and this idea of nationality that comes as a connection to the local is also quite dangerous. So to see the local as a value that needs to be held as the most precious thing is something that we really need to be wary of and be very careful of how we approach it. So I think that my position is that there is no real value just in the local versus the global. One needs to be able to understand the condition in all its complexity.
Yeah, and I think the other site that both of us are interested in is the site of the screen somehow, right? Like the site of the films that we make, like where are they ultimately consumed? And I think that, that's the nature of the work of the speculative architect, right? Is that site isn't something where you stick a building, but this exhibition is a kind of site that we make work for. Vimeo is a kind of site that you might make a film for, and those sites have currency and consequence as well, right? Where, I think part of why we're interested in film is because it's a medium that translates across discourses and disciplines, right? Like it's a vehicle through which the architect can talk to audiences that don't normally gather in rooms like this one, because fiction is this extraordinary shared language, and like Trojan horses, we can insert into those mediums of popular culture really critical, important architectural ideas about technology, about space, about the local, and it may reach people that don't normally hang out in art bookshops. And I think that's one of the duties of the contemporary practitioner as well, is to start to try and engage broader audiences in the sorts of conversations we're having today.
Yeah.
Actually, just to follow up with that, I think that the city everywhere, actually, I really like that work, Liam. And I think it takes us to a different level in the sense that, I guess we had Genius Loci, then we had the kind of generic city logic. And in fact, actually, really, we're in a situation whereby the physicality of space per se is not quite the same as it used to be. I don't even know who lives next door to me, frankly, but every morning or evening or whatever, I'm online checking up through WeChat, whatever, all over the world. And I think what you've done is taken that and pointing out that these kind of devices actually are kind of the consequences of our using it are kind of having an effect on somebody in Namibia or something, I don't know where. And I think that's an incredibly healthy healthy perspective that kind of explodes that kind of typical architectural perception of physical form and takes it and thinks through the consequences of where it's going to be kind of globally. I guess I just got two straightforward, actually kind of simple questions, and that is to say, it seems to me this is kind of like a collation of a lot of research over the past from the Unknown Fields Division. Is this kind of wrapping up that kind of subject? That's one question. The second thing is, I mean, I actually thought that the way you presented it was very powerful, but the movie per se has no voiceover. So are you going to be producing a voiceover to go with it? I mean, how do you present this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of co-opting the medium of the city symphony that probably Penelope also connects with, right? Where you create this collaged version of a place, and you also create a kind of a lyricism through which you might describe it. I just find it a more engaging format than the architecture PowerPoint lecture. That's where it began, really. But as our projects move more towards film, really we're interested in the process of world building that produces those films. The film is just one output, but there's, as you described, there's a whole body of research that goes into the world of the films that we make. Like the project upstairs, there was an entire weekend of conversations and discussions with people that are based here, as well as interlopers that are flying in, and what I would describe as kind of the live cinema performance, which is what these talks that I do in various forms are, is a way of expanding and unpacking the film itself to talk about the conversations around it that fed into it, right? So I describe the films as being kind of a pocket narrative, but the performances as a tour through the world of the film, right? So each film that we've made has an associated storytelling performance that goes with it, where I think there is some currency in being in a room narrating it rather than just doing a voiceover for it. And it's as close as the architect is going to get to a rock concert or living out my dreams of a failed musician. And yeah, sometimes we have a live band on stage that performs a soundtrack live, or a live DJ that's doing mixing with it. And sometimes we remix the visuals live as well. It just becomes a way of bringing people into the room that wouldn't normally be in there if it was a shit I done lecture based on PowerPoint with a few competition entries that I never won, Yeah.
Just one final thought. I thought that the way you presented it, I mean, I guess there's a difference between design fiction and world building in some ways, and I think through Alex McDowell, I guess, and the way that he approached, or they approached, Minority Report, it was kind of taking on a kind of like a political position. I mean, it wasn't just kind of let's imagine all this kind of crazy thing, but let's be critical about the ethical questions that are embedded in there. And I think that's really what I think sets this work apart, having this kind of ethical dimension.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Is there another question? Yes.
Regarding locality, this brings to my mind the question of authentic and picturesque, because as you said before regarding the future, also information is not evenly distributed. Therefore, if you gain your information through internet and other means, you can by default be just a local person because you have influence from wherever.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all in some way like. The analogy I was using in the film was this idea that we all cast shadows that stretch across the earth, right? And the decision we make to upgrade our phone, to drive a certain car, to tweet at someone, all have reverberating consequences that end up in landscapes like the one that Kate and I visited. And I think being mindful of those relationships, I think is not just kind of an ethical project of the global citizen, but it's actually a design project, right? Where, the product design or the design of a device is also by proxy the design of a landscape, right? So the collapsing mediums of product design and landscape design is actually a new form of practice that most people are playing with, whether they realize it or not, right? Yeah. No. I should say, like, thanks for asking the questions. Like, every now and again, you get people that always come in, and like, no matter who's talking, they always have a question for them, and it keeps the room alive. Thanks, man.
Yes, Zenobia.
Thank you for the videos and the presentations. I have a question about whether these films exist together with a construct or a physical architecture, or an architecture that is described in a more abstract way. Because I think one thing that these films do is giving the narrative and the stories and things that describe how architectures are experienced. So I wonder if you have been interested in doing those along with the conventional, let's say, architecture, where you design one construct and you don't know yet how is it going to be experienced. Have you ever thought of doing those two things at the same time?
If I would ask from, if I would answer from my point of view, I was presenting projects which are student projects. So by definition, they are speculative, but they are designing buildings that are partly conceived as physical, but also have this dimension that might be seen as a more empathetic and experience-based experience. At the same time, I think it's something that some of the students started looking at recently, and it's another dimension of where this architectural essay film or the architectural film in general might go, is work that connects with more immersive technologies like the Vive and the Oculus and computer games. Because in computer games you have worlds that are created that you can navigate, and they might not be physical, but they have an experiential quality which is it's possible to navigate. So I think the boundaries between what is built as a physical bricks and mortar architecture and what is built as a space that can still be experienced in all its complexity and in dimensions that we don't exactly know yet are merging. And this is a field that I think this idea of film, we call it film now, but it's something that has the potential of becoming something much more immersive.
Yeah, I mean, and I love my brother Michael's description of architecture as background, right? But we're in a condition where that background now exists on a spectrum from the physical all the way through to the fully immersive, as Penelope is describing, and the digital, right? Where a building has these coexisting realities, both a physical space, but also this Borgesian digital model draped over the top of it that we all simultaneously occupy, right? So someone at the back is currently flicking through their phone, immersed in a football score. Someone's over there's kind of live streaming porn, right? And some people listening to what I'm saying. So this one room is the container for a whole lot of simultaneous realities. So just describing it as a physical architecture by talking about the ceiling tiles and the pink curtains is no longer sufficient, right? We now need to describe it through all of the different mediums and contexts in which people are currently occupying it. And that doesn't extend just to a way of describing these spaces, but it also extends to potentially how we should now start to design them, right? Where the design project of an architect is no longer just a material palette of concrete, steel, but includes resolution, and fidelity and all these layers of augmented reality that we now exist within.
Yeah, just to follow up what you're saying, I wonder if you are interested in revealing these layers one after the other, let's say, to reveal that background Michael Young mentioned, just, and maybe it is a combination of things, as you're saying, but are you interested in clarifying these elements, or are you interested in only presenting them through the experience of the movie or the film? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's up in the installation upstairs, one of the stories that James Bridle wrote called Lightroom. We travel through a space, but that space, the furniture in that space is constantly shifting and changing, and the narrative is about a real estate agent that's showing someone around, trying to sell them on an apartment, and they're switching through various furniture design catalogs, from high-end Martin Newson, Concord Lounge to IKEA, and this idea that these kind of the function of a space becomes like an AR app, and these new immersive technologies become mechanisms of gentrification somehow, right? So the film work is trying to speculate on that as a condition, but I think a very easy and logical endpoint is to also translate that out into real installations outside of the film, outside of the screen, and in turn into prototypes and architecture in traditional form. And if an architect in a practice that normally does loft conversions or bar fit outs isn't prototyping spaces in VR and AR, then they're crazy and destined for obsolescence. So I really think it's a new medium that all architects, traditional or otherwise, need to be engaging with.
Okay, I think that this has been a very long and interesting event. This is the right time to go for dinner or a drink. Thank you, everybody, very much for being here. Good night.